Hello, I'm Graham and I hope everyone's having a great day, and welcome to this Q&A session for the Panasonic Lumix FZ300 or 330 bridge camera. Now, this came about because of an email I received from one of my subscribers, and here's his email.
When trying to do any macro or extreme close-up work, I find it impossible to get the result I want, which is close focus shots whilst using the smallest aperture possible. If I switch to Aperture Priority, I can obviously choose my aperture, but my close working distance is extremely limited, usually at 0.3 meters, which fails to allow a close enough image. I seem to find the only way I can get close shots is by working in auto or intelligent auto mode, but then I am stuck. It appears with f2.8.
Now, I'm going to try and answer that email in two parts. The first one is regarding the f2.8 setting in the IA or IA Plus mode. Now, the camera itself, when you set it in the IA or IA Plus mode, will resort to using the AF macro mode. And in that mode, the camera will focus from 0.01 meters to infinity, which is why he's been able to get so close to his subject. But the problem here is he's only got an aperture of f2.8. Now, even with an aperture of f2.8, because of the crop factor of this camera, it's got the equivalent of full frame camera of something like f11 or f16 in terms of depth of field. But if you want to use smaller apertures, then we need to use the IA Plus mode, and that allows us to use one of the flyout panels, which is the background defocus, as Panasonic call it, and you can then use that to set the aperture anywhere between f2.8 and f8, and the camera will automatically compensate by changing the shutter speed and the ISO if needed. So let's look at that on the desktop and see how that performs. Well, you can see now we're in the IA mode, and in particular the camera has selected the macro mode. You've got the eye and the little flower symbol, which means we're in the macro mode. If I just move the zoom control, so we're going to the widest zoom setting, you can see the camera is saying we can focus from 0.01 meter to infinity, and that's why the subscriber has been able to get so close to his subject, because of that fact. Now you can see on screen also we've got the aperture of f2.8, and the camera uses the ISO method. So it will change the ISO and it will change the shutter speed dependent on the amount of light that's coming in. But the most important thing here is the fact that the camera can focus, and you can see we get the focus rectangle changes to a green colour, and we get focus lock confirmation with the little green indicator on the LCD screen. Now, if you want to control the aperture, there's a facility in the flyout screen. Now, this doesn't matter whether you're in the IA or the IA Plus mode for this particular control. If you tap the tab on the right hand side, it flies out this panel, and you can see in the middle of it there we've got a little icon which shows a face and some mountains, and that is the one that Panasonic call background defocus, and it's that control we're going to use to change the aperture. So if I just touch that, you can see immediately it brings up the exposure scale, and on there is our aperture and shutter speed. So at the moment it's showing our aperture of f2.8, but I can use the back control dial, or I can use a touchscreen to actually set the aperture I wanted. So if I wanted aperture of f5.6, I can select 5.6 directly on the aperture scale, or I can use that back control dial. Now, it's best not to use an aperture of f8, because you're running into what's called diffraction limited resolution, and your image will become slightly softer. So I would recommend you use an aperture of f5.6 for your macro shots. That gives the effective depth of field of something like f32 on a full frame camera, so you should be dealing with quite a lot of depth of field. And again, you can see we can get focus lock. Now, the subscriber said that when he went to the Aperture Priority mode, or any of the other semi-automatic modes, and I'm going to do that now, I'm going to turn to Aperture Priority, indicated by the A on the LCD screen. Again, if I use the zoom lever and go to the widest position, you can see it says 0.3 meters to infinity, and that's what the subscriber was getting. You can only get down to 12 inches to the subject, and obviously with small macro subjects that's not going to give you a big enough image. The way around that is to use the little button underneath the side focus wheel, and if you press that, you notice it brings up on screen the macro mode, and the moment macro mode is off, and if we use the cursor dial, we can go to the macro zoom, which I don't recommend you using, that only gives you digital zoom, but we want the one on the left hand side, which is AF macro, and that is the one which allows us to focus down to 0.01 meters at the widest angle setting. So if I just press menu set, that locks us in, and you can actually see on screen we've got the symbol for AF macro. So again, if I use the zoom lever and move it all the way to the telephoto position, you can see we've got 0.01 meters to infinity, and that's where the camera will actually focus. Now it will depend on the amount of zoom or the amount of focal length you've got set. So if I go up to something like 50 millimeters, use the zoom control to get to 50 millimeters, right. Now if you look at that, you can see that the camera now is at 0.1 to 0.1, going from 25 millimeters to 50 millimeters. And if I go up to 100 millimeters effective focal length, you can see we're up to about 0.5 of a meter away. And as we extend that focal range, you'll notice that the camera quickly gets to 1 meter at about 140 millimeters effective focal length. So that would be the minimum distance you can focus at with that amount of focal length on the lens. If you wanted to use that focal length in order to blur the background, then you'd have to be using supplementary diopter lenses to enable you to get closer to the subject. And that has been the subject of quite a few of my previous videos. If you just search for macro and close-up filters, you'll find several videos in my playlists. Now he also had a second part to his question, and here's that second part.
When having selected the scene selection mode via the mode dial, I fail to see the simple way to return to the selections offered, having taken shots in one selected mode, other than switching the mode dial away and then back to the scene selection mark. Again, I'm probably just missing the details in your book, but I'm afraid that the range of potential settings and combinations is what always seems to leave me wishing we were back using 35mm film.
Now to answer that particular question, let's look at the scene menus of this camera, and I'll show you how to get back to the choice when you've been using the scene menu. If I turn the camera to the scene mode, you can see that we can change the options up to 22 options, I think there are. So in the scene menu we can select any of those 24 options. So if I had a romantic sunset glow, when I press menu set, that is the one that the camera will use. You could take that picture. So having taken that picture with the romantic sunset glow, if I wanted to change the scene type, if I press menu set, you can see that it brought up the original menu, which shows us we're in the romantic sunset glow. If I wanted to change that to, say, a handheld night shot or any of the other scene modes, if I press menu set, that takes us back into the operation where we can actually change the type of scene to select. So if I wanted a warm glowing nightscape, I can just select that again, and I could take that picture. And again, if I wanted to change the scene type one more time, I can just press menu set, and that will allow me to change the type. If you've been into any other menu whilst you're in the scene type selection, you just need to go up to the top, which allows you to go back into scene selection. Well, that's it for this short video on the question and answer session. Hopefully it's answered my subscriber's question, and it may have helped you understand the focus modes of the camera a little bit better. So until my next video, thanks again for watching. Please do take care, and I hope to see you all in the next one.